Hi, Mike Matchett with Small World Big Data, and we are here today talking about where data lives and what do you do with data when it's all over the world and how do you get your hands on it and how do people understand in a company where their data is, what it's doing, how does IT protect it? I mean, data is exploding everywhere and more companies are more global, operating in more regions than ever before. It's a real nightmare sometimes for IT equipment. I am excited to be here today because we are talking with Hammerspace. I've got Molly Presley here. Welcome, Molly.
Hello, Mike. Good to see you.
We are going to talk today, Molly, about some of the new things that are coming in Hammerspace because you guys have been working on this a long time, but are sort of also fresh out of the blocks with the GA product and some enhancements already that are kind of interestingly different than anything else we've seen. But let's just start back a little bit. Tell me a little bit about how you got involved in Hammerspace and what attracted you to that and what Hammerspace is really up to.
Oh, that's a fun question, actually. So I've been in the data storage space for decades, working at a lot of the NAS vendors and parallel file system vendors, and kind of found that every system, while different, was very similar and got a little bit, interested in doing something new. So I'd moved on into the SaaS world and was out of the industry when I was getting phone calls from a recruiting company who our recruiting team, and I wasn't really answering the calls because I was happy. But then this guy named David Flynn showed up on my phone. And I was like, I wonder if that's really the David Flynn from Fusion IO, which it was. And he was trying to get me to come back to run marketing for this company called Hammerspace. And what really caught my attention, while David is a fantastic innovator, visionary founder, the technology which we've built here at Hammerspace is something that the user groups that I've run for other companies like Cumulo, Quantum, DDN, this was a real problem that users wanted solved, and up until Hammerspace has not been solved in the industry. So I thought that'd be a great deal of fun to work on as a marketeer.
All right, and Hammerspace, I mean, everyone I think is pretty familiar with Fusion IO and David Flynn, some of the things we've gone in the past. Some people aren't that familiar with what Hammerspace is, and you did, put something to GA last year. Could you just tell us roughly what Hammerspace is doing to help people access data globally?
So essentially, in a nutshell, which is hard to do with Hammerspace, but I'm going to put it in a nutshell, what we do is solve the problem of where organizations have distributed infrastructure. Maybe they have multiple data centers or data center clusters, multiple clouds, multiple cloud regions, and we bring together that data into a global high performance file system, parallel file system, and make that data available in a single namespace to remote users, remote applications, wherever they may reside. So essentially, the workflow can be such that you don't have to worry about data gravity. You can view and access your data from wherever you want to. And that may be a really interesting machine learning engine in AWS or a remote worker in India, whatever it is. They can all see all of the data in the global data environment, and we take care of moving the content around when it needs to be moved so that you don't have to move your compute to your data. Instead, you actually can move your data to your compute or to your workers where it needs to be. So it's really just solving the decentralized business problem and making data accessible where people need it.
And unlike prior attempts that people might have some familiarity with in terms of putting a thin global file redirection layer around everything, we're here talking about supercomputing quantities of data. Sometimes we're talking about fast data. We're talking about completely large clusters in different regions of the world, and anybody anywhere can access the data on any one of those clusters, right? This isn't just a little shimmed redirection.
That's right. Yeah. So whether your performance, your file count, your capacity needs are very high or not so high, the system is designed to meet. Just to give you a sample, we did testing with Microsoft Azure's EDA group, and we were able to saturate Azure's networks. We have parallel file system users who are using us for literally supercomputing. So if you need that kind of performance, we have it. Or if it's just lots of scale where you have lots and lots of buckets and lots of files that need to be shared, we're designed for that kind of scale.
Okay.
And in
So,
production in those types of scale, not just designed for.
Right, not just, and I don't just want to leave people to the impression that it's performance, but it's also about security and data sovereignty controls and other
Mhm.
objectives that you can put in there. It's pretty cool. People should definitely take a look at that in today's world. You don't even call yourselves really a storage company anymore. Well, you're calling yourselves more of a data company. How's that going?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, it's going great. That's what people need. In fact, I'm out in Paris right now and was at the HPC user conference this morning. And they were talking about for the France Exascale project, that the number one challenge they have is figuring out the decentralized workflows and the data architectures. And that idea of data officers, data architectures, instead of storage or infrastructure architectures is becoming a more common thing for organizations to have. But even if you don't use those terms, you definitely can think of, I mean, just think of the name of your company, Mike. This whole idea of people need data where and when they want it, but there's a lot of infrastructure related regulations and rules that are built into a lot of storage environments that made that really challenging. So we are a data company and we're about making data available when and where you need it with the security that's appropriate. But it takes a lot of education too, because it's a new way of thinking about architecting. Instead of architecting for cost or performance, you're architecting for data requirements.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about just quickly architecturally. When I want to put in Hammerspace into my environment globally, uh, where do some of the bits go? Am I just turning this on in one place? Do I have to install things everywhere? How does that roll out for an IT person?
Yeah, so essentially we're a software only company. Our software can be run on your infrastructure or your preferred clouds. So cloud native, containers, bare metal, there's a variety of deployment options. And once you put our software in place, we have something called a metadata assimilation, which occurs that creates the metadata layer about your data that creates metadata about from a NAS cluster, a cloud file system, whatever it is, so that once you deploy it, we create metadata about all of the data and all the different environments in your world. And from a user's perspective, you hook them up once over SMB or NFS, so standard NAS protocols, or for an application, that'd be true too. And once they're hooked up, they can see all of the data in the global data environment, no matter where it's stored, which vendor's technology. And then and they can be doing their work and then you as an IT person without disruption, if you need to decommission some hardware or move to a different cloud or whatever you're trying to do, that's done transparent to the work that the users and the applications are doing.
So no more deep, dark storage corners. Everyone can see the data, all the data, no matter where it is, and IT can do some actions without disrupting users because you're taking care of that at the data services layer, which is pretty cool. And I will say, I love the fact that it's all about the metadata. There's so much power in metadata. We don't even have the time to scratch the surface of what you could normally use with it. But you've got some announcements of how you're extending the use of metadata to even further greatness. Tell us about what's going on there.
Yeah, you bet. And like you say, we could talk for hours, and I won't do that to you in the audience. But what's new and interesting about what we're doing with metadata is within Hammerspace, and this is the technology that's available today from us, we create very rich, actionable metadata, and then a user can accomplish objectives based on that metadata. So it may be my objective is I want to maintain data sovereignty or specific ransomware protection goals. That can be done today, but what we're finding is putting more control in the hands of the users is something that a lot of organizations are asking for, that users and IT don't really want to have tickets opened every time a user wants to do something with a file, every time they want to have the ability to roll back a file. So we're putting more and more focus in this release based on customer feedback on having some more user-generated metadata. So that's things like a operating system level metadata plugin. So the Hammerspace metadata plugin for Windows makes it possible for a user who's viewing data in their global data environment to be able to assign through their Windows interface in a drop-down menu like their tradition to seeing their own, create and apply their own custom metadata tags to the content they work with. And that moves into the Hammerspace metadata layer. Users from that same Windows interface can also initiate file protection and recovery, so they can turn on versioning, they can recover or work with their own versions of files without having to work with IT to make that possible. And it's important to say IT first sets policies to make sure that their governance and compliance regulations are met. But then as users are working, we're putting some control to make the environment more nimble for them. We've also found that on the user side, that there's been some conflicts can occur, even though our metadata layer works well for collaboration. There are cases where a customer really wants to reserve a file for themselves and not have anyone else messing with it. So we've put that in the hands of the user to be able to do a file reservation as well.
All right, so users really now have the ability to do things like the admins do. They can add their own metadata tags. They can turn on their own versioning. They can reserve files from their perspective. So they're seeing all the data in the world in the global file system, and now they have their own sort of fractal-like control set of capabilities. I can't even imagine what people are going to do with their own metadata and their own metadata processes, but there's just some mind-boggling opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, we've always been kind of hamstrung by what vendors have built in the system, and then this push-pull of what should users be able to do, what should IT be able to do, and we're working to increasingly make sure we can achieve the data protection and security and access requirements by IT that they need to control. But then making users have the ability to have flexibility and the access to more data that isn't orphaned off in some cluster that they don't even know exists. There's a lot of power here that it's like you say, will be really interesting to see what people do with it as it gets deployed.
Right, a lot of optimizations. Now, work groups can tag things with metadata tags and not have to necessarily move the data into a shared collaboration folder and give everyone access, right? They can start to use that tagging. I'm just used to like going to the File Explorer and coloring things red or yellow or green, and who knows what that means, right? With the little dots, and it's hardly
Exactly.
used feature. But if I could go in there and tag something like fiscal or end of year or critical or whatever the tag is, that would be
exactly, and that's exactly what it's designed for. A user in finance will do something different than a user in research, and they both can do what they need to.
All right, and just one last thing: if I've got literally tons of data gravity, right? How do I find something now? There's the world's my oyster there. It opens up. How do I go in there and look for data that matters to me? How do I find all the things tagged important, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of ways we handle it. And if you're in an industry where you're used to using a specific application or tool, we do a lot of integration. So a company like ShotGrid in the media and entertainment space, you would work in ShotGrid and say, I want all pictures that have Angelina Jolie in it. And that would happen through the tools you're used to working with because of the integration we have with that tool. It might be different if you're working with an AI engine up in Amazon and you're running an AI engine to create specific metadata about a video file, whatever it is. So it depends on your workflows. You certainly can query the metadata control plane of Hammerspace yourself, or you may want to work with the applications you're accustomed to working with. And so it will be a little bit different depending on the workflow.
All right, so this whole thing is called global data environment, right? This is what we're moving towards is a brave new world where I don't even think about there's IT ops, data ops, DevOps. We don't even want to think about the infrastructure at all. We don't even want to think about storage. We just want to focus on where our data is and how do we get the value of the data. Molly, if someone wants to learn more about Hammerspace, they want to look at some of the things we've teased them with today. What would you recommend?
Definitely. There's a what's new page on hammerspace.com that will cover what's new that we're talking about today. I also host a podcast called Data Unchained, which is available on all your favorite podcasting platforms. And that's a really interesting way to hear how different industries and people are thinking about this. And you can find Data Unchained on our website as well.
Awesome. I appreciate you being here today. And we look forward to having you back at some point to explain some more of this, because I think we just teased the box open.
Yeah, it was great to catch up with you too, Mike. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care, folks. Check out Hammerspace. It's all about the data. Actually, it's really all about the metadata. Well, metadata is data. Take care, folks.